Welcome to the Blog Boy Roundtable. I'm Seth Varnadore. Today, only joined by one other blog boy. We've got Nick Simon of DK Nation, DraftKings. We wanted to talk about this new SEC schedule just got released tonight. 7 o'clock, they went live, released the schedule. There's there's some brutal ones in there, Nick. What are kind of your general thoughts just at the top here, and then we'll get into some teams specifically.
Yeah, it's very interesting how they set this up. Well, first of all, it's kind of stupid how this has been kind of a year-long process of them like trying to decide, oh, are we going to do 8 games? Are we going to do 9 games? Which games are, and it's like, you could have like handled this a long, long time ago. I know, like, particularly with SEC schools and their alumni and fan bases, they plan all that stuff out some of them multiple years in advance. So like for them to like drag this out this long when you knew Texas and Oklahoma were coming as soon as 2 years ago, it's kind of ridiculous. And the thing is, it's like next year's schedule is going to be 8 when everyone knows that you're just going to go to 9 the following year to begin with. So I don't know, but like as far as the schedule goes, it's kind of very interesting. Like I was mentioning to you before we came on air, I was just kind of going through, jotting down different notes on each team and each school, and like it's very interesting how they set it up. Like there's certain schools where nothing really changes, and then there's certain schools that just got completely that's going to have a pretty rough time. Like just off the top of my head, from what I remember, Alabama, they're going to have a pretty even by their standards, they're going to have a pretty tough schedule. I guess we'll get into it with the new schools. OU is put into the sharpshooter as soon as they get into the league. So yeah, just interesting stuff all around.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I thought there's somewhat of it feels like a little bit of feet dragging putting out 8, but I would imagine they're really trying to create some leverage to get more money for 9. It seemed like that they were thinking about 9, and maybe the money didn't come in. So maybe they're thinking, all right, we'll load up this first year, put some big games on. Like you've got some games, we'll talk about some of our favorite games, but you've got a bunch of games that haven't been played in a while in the regular season. And that I think will pop ratings. So that could be part of the calculus too. But yeah, I'd imagine we'll talk about the Big Ten, how they did it towards the end here, because I really thought they took a different approach and it was interesting, and maybe the SEC can learn from that. But let's start with the newbies. So you've got Oklahoma and Texas, right? The reason all this stuff is changing. Oklahoma really is going to take it on the chin, it seems like, in the first year, just in terms of a tough game. We'll add the schedule up here. So you got Oklahoma. They get home games, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, and then they lose one home game with the neutral with Texas. But Auburn
that's always neutral. The Red River, yeah.
Auburn on the road is not easy, and who knows what Auburn will be with Freeze in the next year. Then at LSU, I think that's kind of, if you're looking for like the welcome to the SEC game, at LSU is probably the one, right?
Yeah, and then I'm looking at like things can get wacky in Oxford. I mean, like if Tennessee, Joe Milton's probably not going to be there, but like Tennessee still with that hype ball offense humming, that's not going to be an easy out. South Carolina can be squirrely too.
Well, South Carolina is starting to recruit really well under Beamer, and if they can keep that momentum going, they'll have a talented team at least. And then you get Missouri, which is like an old school hate that's coming back. So there's not a ton of easy outs here, I don't think.
Yeah, like you just mentioned, I kind of like how they with them in particular, and we'll see this with Texas and Texas A&M. They kind of tried to cluster like all of those like Big 8 Southwest Conference-ish schools together to at least kind of like tip of the cap. Like, okay, there's history, like Oklahoma, Missouri is not like the biggest rivalry, but there's like a century of history there, so we kind of have to like pair them off. But yeah, just particularly with that Alabama game at home again, that because you're looking at, I mean, Oklahoma was really shaky last year. Who knows what they're going to be in 2024 if Venables is even going to still be there. And then you have an Alabama team where where it's kind of apparent that it's nearing the end of this thing, and so that's gonna be interesting, especially if it's like one of those early season September games, like September kickoffs. Like, yeah,
Yeah, and then the other kind of wrinkle in there is you got Tennessee coming, which you mentioned, right? Head coach Josh Heupel. Well, where'd he go to college and win a national championship? Oklahoma. So you got a little bit of homecoming there.
and that's right, and there's a little bit of bad blood between Heupel and OU because he got fired by Stoops, and they didn't when he was the offensive coordinator there, and they didn't split on really good terms. So
Yeah.
he's gonna show back up to Norman trying to prove a point there.
Yeah, and then you got the other newbie, Texas, who I think just at first blush, it would seem as if they got off a little easier. But I think one thing that they've got on here is they've got away games at two teams that really hate them, like really hate Arkansas. That's kind of that's an old school Southwest Conference rival, I think, right? So that's like way back in the day. Those teams used to go. Was that the game Nixon went to?
Yeah,
right.
The 1969 Nixon, the Nixon game where like undefeated Texas, undefeated Arkansas, winner basically claims the national championship. Nixon shows up as a covert Southern strategy move. Well, we can look it up. Look at the history book. Yeah, like hell, these two teams played in Fayetteville 2 years ago, if you remember, and like
wild.
Wins that game, and like they have the horns down on the screen. Like Arkansas cares a lot about that game,
and then if you're looking for somebody that hates Texas more than Arkansas, well, you found them. It's Texas A&M, a game that has not been played right since Texas A&M came into the conference. The first one is back at A&M. So I think, well, like first look, it would appear that Texas, they got what would you think, I guess maybe the tougher games, or at least traditionally SEC, the two better in terms of like the conference history in Florida and Georgia at home. That Texas A&M game is going to be wild. And hopefully that's a Thanksgiving week game like it used to be. But I can't imagine what that one's going to be like because that's the first one in a long time. And those people, I mean, they really hate each other. I think it's been gone so long. That's kind of undersold how intense that rivalry can be.
It's been like this Cold War for a decade where both teams or in their fan bases and even their ADs have like tried to pretend like they don't want to play each other. It's like, no, like we're good. We don't need them on the schedule. But like dude, just play. Like you want to play each other. We know this. So now they're finally getting the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, every year during when bowl season was kicking in and people started making predictions, you'd see a Texas A&M in a bowl game, and everyone would get juiced up about it, and then it never came to fruition. So I thought that was one. There were some people that thought they might not do that game. That would have been a gigantic miss if they didn't do that. So I'm glad to see that one on the schedule. But I think Texas didn't get off easy. I think can we definitively say Oklahoma got the shorter end of the stick here?
Yeah, because it's just Alabama. I mean, just balance it out. Alabama, LSU, and then you have just a bunch of teams that could come in, snipe them again. The chaos element of Auburn, Heupel not like Heupel having something to prove to his alma mater. Like it's gonna be rough for Venables or whoever's there.
Yeah, and then you've got outside of this. SEC's wants everybody to have at least one P5 out of conference game. Oklahoma doesn't have theirs yet, so I'd assume they're probably trying to get somebody, you know, a lower down P5 to just fit the qualification, but maybe get themselves a W out
Well,
of
because
conference. But Texas is going to Michigan in 2024, so they got a blue blood schedule there.
because the Texas Michigan thing that was like horse trading with Fox or something like that where like
Yeah, right. To get them to make it easier for them to get out, Big 12 wanted some, or Fox wanted some games to kind of cover
yeah
for them leaving the Big 12. Right, it's kind of the idea.
yeah so they like flipped that, so now they're going to Michigan. It was supposed to be Michigan coming to Texas, and now they like
They flipped it.
they flipped it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be good. So I mean, both these teams are kind of hitting the ground running. There's Texas gets Vanderbilt. Oklahoma, I mean, probably the worst team Oklahoma gets in conference is Missouri, who is oddly frisky. It seems in years, so that'll be tough.
Real quick, like while you mentioned Vanderbilt, we'll probably not like really get around to them. I'm looking at their schedule. They have a very interesting home slate because you get Alabama, you're getting Alabama, Tennessee, Texas. They're going to lose all of those games, like no doubt. But those are going to be like 3 sellouts, we can assume.
Yeah.
You're thinking about Vanderbilt, like, and how they're trying to, like, I know they have like a bunch of facilities upgrades and stuff coming along. That's going to help because you're going to have those fan bases right there. I mean, Alabama already has a huge presence in Nashville. Obviously, Tennessee does. And then Texas, they're going to be jacked to just go to Nashville for the first time basically ever in the regular season. So get on Vandy. You're not gonna win those games, but still gonna get plenty of revenue and stuff.
And they probably got, I would imagine, like they got 3 games they would want in terms of what used to be division games in South Carolina, Kentucky, and Missouri. If you said, "Hey, pick 3 out of the East that you're going to keep on the schedule," they probably would have picked those 3, right? So they don't, no Florida, no Georgia. They did pick up LSU and Auburn, so it's not going to be easy by any stretch for Vandy. But I think they got a couple where they feel like maybe they can be competitive in a couple of years. I don't know. All right, let's go. Let's kind of go through here. And just anybody stick out to you? Who do you think kind of got the worst deal out of the teams that were kind of in conference already? Does anybody like just stick out big time for you?
So like I said, I like kind of went through and jotted everything down. Alabama, very interesting because it's kind of balanced out. You keep Auburn. Oh, Georgia, like they're playing Georgia regular season. That's going to, again, we don't know what, like we have no idea like what a Nick Saban Alabama is going to look like next year.
Yeah,
basically, and like whether or not they're going to be showing signs of decline. Whereas we know like Georgia, like that train's still going to be rolling.
Yeah, they're probably on pace right now to possibly sign. So Texas A&M, Alabama is still recruiting really well, but that quarterback position I think is going to be their big swing this year, and then that'll obviously affect them in the next year. But a couple years ago, you had A&M with the best class ever. Alabama, I think last year ended up being there, but it looks like Georgia's on track this year to even break kind of both those. So Georgia's definitely just a machine that there's not really. It seems like the only thing that can stop them is like Athens PD at this point. Like it's and wanting to race cars. That's kind of at this point it's going to be something from within. It really feels like, but yeah, Alabama. So you got Auburn. The Georgia game is huge. I think that's one that's like if you're looking to pop a TV rating, Alabama Georgia goes on. They played I think in the COVID year in 2020.
Yeah,
but that wasn't the full experience. Obviously, the stadium wasn't full, and so that'll be in Alabama. Put them in a body bag, I think, in the second half. Right? I think it was tight for a while. The LSU game stays for Alabama, which I thought was big, and then they got to go, as we mentioned earlier, on the road to Oklahoma and Tennessee. So Their schedule's not easy. What did you have written down for Alabama? What was your note? Was it the Georgia game?
Yeah, it was just the Georgia game, and again, we're going to find out if like this machine that we've grown to know and love for the last 15 years is still going to be humming, or if you're going to start to see cracks with this.
The beginning of the end is this year in Tampa, week 3.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Mighty USF Bulls, baby. All right. Arkansas. I think I think Arkansas's got a tough schedule, but I think they're probably happy with what they got at home. LSU's a rival. Then they get Texas. LSU, they got a trophy, right? They got the
trophy. It's like a one-sided thing. Like Arkansas fans care about that rivalry. LSU fans not so much. Where's that game going to be? That game's
at Arkansas.
In Arkansas. Okay, so Arkansas fans, they'll show up and show out for that.
So they got LSU and Texas both at home. So I think right there you're feeling pretty good. Ole Miss and Tennessee should also be good games. So I think they're probably pretty happy with their home schedule. And then one of their away games is a neutral against Texas A&M in Jerry World, the Jerry Jones game. So they've got to be pretty. And then they're Mississippi State and Missouri on the road. They probably feel pretty winnable for where they're at, and Auburn might be kind of a swing game there. So, what did you have on Arkansas?
Yeah, like I said, I really like how they just hooked Arkansas up with that Southwest, like just a Southwest vibe.
Yeah,
they already play at Jerry World, and now you're getting Texas back a game like that. All their fans are going to be amped up, and so it's going to be a rowdy, fun time. And even that Ole Miss game at home, like Arkansas Ole Miss is always wacky and crazy. Yeah. So
that was the crazy lateral game, right, from a few years back.
Yeah,
it's more than a few now. Well, the inevitable march of time continues. All right, let's go to Auburn. What'd you have on this one? I thought they maintained the Alabama game and the Georgia game, which are both on the road, so that's tough. They get Oklahoma at home, but they get a couple more East teams, I think, than normal. So does that balance it out in your eyes?
Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about this. So you come from a Florida family, right?
Yes.
Auburn, before the split in '92, Auburn, Florida was a thing.
Even after, it was till like 2010-ish. They played every year, and it was really like I was just talking with somebody about it. A buddy of mine that's a big Florida fan. Auburn was really like number 2. It was like Georgia in conference. It was Georgia's number 1, and Auburn was number 2 for a long time. Tennessee was kind of a '90s thing.
And I'll get to that when I get to Florida. Like Auburn and Gainesville are not that far away from each other. Like I think that when getting rid of these divisions, you have an opportunity to kind of pair people back together historically. Because the SEC, you have these different pockets where schools before '92 didn't really interact with each other that much. The schools themselves just made the schedule. Auburn and Florida, that was a rivalry. They played every single year, and I'm kind of disappointed. It's like a missed opportunity. I feel like to not like pair these two up again. Like those two schools need to play more.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I think Texas A&M's kind of filling that void. Florida's played Texas A&M a bunch since Texas A&M came in. That's weird. This will be the 5th time. I think I read 4th or 5th time they've played, and they've played Auburn hardly at all since the switch. So that would be one if they go to 9 that I think that's got to be. But it makes it tough if Florida's if Florida's at its peak. Auburn would have Alabama, Georgia, and Florida every year. So that's kind of the trade there. But in terms of historic nature, Florida Auburn should be played every year, in my opinion. That was the game as you grew up. It was, I still remember. I think Florida was number 1 in the country in 1994. Bo Nix's dad, Patrick, hits Frank Sanders for a touchdown late in the game. Auburn wins 38-35. Florida loses, and it was just like it was Auburn and Georgia were kind of the big two. In '93, Auburn went undefeated, beat Florida. Then I think they had a streak going into '94 as well. So And you had Terry Bowden there, so you had like the double Bowden thing for Florida. So yeah, that was a big game that just went by the wayside for some reason when they switched to they switched how they did the East-West thing, and basically they gave Florida LSU, and that's become something, but it's not doesn't have the same historical significance as Auburn and Florida. So
yeah, just like I said, they're relatively close. They're relatively close. Oh,
yeah, and so we'll move on to Florida. I mean, when I feel bad for the guy, but looking at this year's schedule for Florida and then the schedule that just came out here, so you've got your home games are Kentucky, which you feel like has got to be, and I think Kentucky and Ole Miss you feel manageable. LSU and Texas A&M are just going to keep recruiting really well, so those are not easy by any means. And then you got the neutral with Georgia, as we said, is a terminator at this point.
Well, when is the Jack Stadium getting renovated?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess that does throw a wrinkle. Maybe they'll play. I've pitched they should play at Daytona. Let's make it. You want to get really crazy? Let's just play at Daytona. But then you get Mississippi State on the road, which I think you feel pretty good about. But your other two road games are Tennessee and Texas. So this is a slate that I like the guy. I don't think he's a bad coach, but this is like when this came out, my first thought was, all right, start looking at coaching candidates for 2025 because these are going to be two really tough schedule years back to back for Florida. Billy Napier came in at a really tough time.
Texas and Georgia, and then so I just alluded to it. They protect Tennessee. I'm sorry, I think that's overrated. Like Florida, Tennessee, like that. Like we don't need to keep protecting that. It was only a thing during Spurrier and
Fulmer.
Like,
yeah, it was like a late 90s. It was probably from 95 on. I know Tennessee did beat Spurrier early. It was one of his earlier like conference losses. But from like 95 on, when kind of Peyton Manning, Daniel Werfel into the early 2000s, it was big. But then Florida went on, when Urban Meyer got in, Florida went on a run against Tennessee for I think, what was it like?
It's like 9. It was like a decade.
It was a long time. So it's a rivalry, I guess. But yeah, I would, if you're asking, I think most old Florida fans, they'd rather have Auburn.
Yeah.
So it kind of is what it is. Georgia's probably the biggest candidate for a step up from from what they're going to have this year, right? Real quick with Florida, we didn't even mention Florida also outside of the schedule, which we said is tough. They also go at Florida State, and they have Miami and UCF at home.
Oh yeah, that's not. You're gonna have
their only non P5 game is Samford at home
because you're playing 3 in-state opponents that hate you.
Yeah, that's going to be.
We're playing a Florida State team that could be coming off a playoff appearance.
Yeah,
Miami team that it's Mario. They should be coming along, and
they were top. I mean, they had a top 5 class, I think, last year.
Yeah,
Florida State, they're going to lose a ton, but they've done so well in the transfer portal. You'd have to assume they'll at least be pretty competitive the next year, kind of regardless of what they lose. And then, UCF, that's going to be a Super Bowl for UCF. So anytime they play anybody in state, it's huge for them.
Yeah.
So it's going to be brutal. And that's, I don't know how many. This year is not much better for them with Utah and then the regular SEC slate and Florida State being up. It's going to be a tough couple of years. And I think like if you're winning with this schedule in year 3 of Billy Napier, you've got your guy. But if you have 2 years like last year, you'll know that he's not the guy, and you'll be moving on. So it's kind of I think Oklahoma's in a similar spot with Venables. It might be a race in 2025 kind of to fill these spots, right? Kind of how it's similar. Like they both had openings the same year. They hired Venables. Florida hires Napier. Those two may be open again at the same time, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, Georgia, moving on to them, quite a step up for them in terms of competition. This year's schedule, pretty easy. What do you have for that? What do you have as your note down for them? They also have Clemson and Georgia Tech in the out of conference, so that's
Yeah, so
another
it
wrinkle.
balances out. Well, I mean, they kind of got screwed because it's like because they were their schedule's easy this year because they were supposed to play Oklahoma, but then the SEC made them like cancel or move that. So what I have down, yeah, of course, Auburn, Florida protected. Road, I mean, interesting enough, road games at Alabama and Texas, like those are going to be like your marquee, like
Yeah.
ESPN Saturday night. Yeah, because they won't be on CBS anymore. So it'll be like your ESPN Saturday night games. Yeah, so like again, they're gonna be I mean, they're still gonna be a death machine, like I mean, schedule's tough, but like they can handle it. It's the death machine, it's Kirby. What else? I wrote down that they protected Tennessee, which again, similar to Florida, it's like I guess it's not really it's kind of a rivalry, but like not really that intense on either side.
Yeah, that's why when we talk, I think when we talk about the Big Ten at the end, I think that's really the way to go. There's not few teams have like three in the S. There's a couple that maybe would stake a claim to three, but Georgia, I don't think they would. I think Bud Elliott talked on Twitter about would both of you, if you just had like to swipe right, yes or no, or swipe right to say this is my rival. Georgia wouldn't swipe right. I don't know if they'd swipe right on Tennessee. Tennessee might on Georgia, but I don't think it would go the other way. So, yeah, I'm with you. Those are kind of just those have never to me been. You do have the hobnail boot from that game, I guess, is an iconic call. So, maybe it's a little more in their fandom, but from the outside looking in, that's not one that I think needs to be protected. At least that's one that can go by the wayside.
Yeah.
Kentucky, how do you feel they turn out? They got some tough road games.
Yeah, tough
I
for
mean,
me.
they got some tough home games too.
So Kentucky at Texas is just Kentucky at Texas is just going to be weird. That's like when Texas gets into the SEC, it's not going to be when they play like Alabama or like when they play Alabama or LSU or Georgia or whoever. It's going to be when you're seeing Kentucky at Texas and you're going to be like, yeah, this is really weird. This doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Texas at Vanderbilt feels that way to me.
Yeah.
It feels similar, right? And then you have Mississippi State going in there as well. But yeah, Kentucky. I mean, that's you're losing some of the. You retained Vanderbilt and South Carolina, who I think they probably feel better than Vanderbilt. Probably on par with South Carolina. I'd imagine they feel pretty close to Florida the way the last few years have gone. But if both teams are at full strength, Florida should be favored there, but there's some other games in here that's just going to be rough.
The one thing that stood out with Kentucky is that this is basically like their every year schedule. Like they were the team that basically kept like an entire SEC schedule outside of Missouri. Like
they exchanged like Texas for Missouri almost.
Yeah, basically, like that could be just like a regular home and home series that they could have signed up. So like nothing really changes for Kentucky, really. And so you have Mark Stoops, who we assume is probably still going to be there and not take the Iowa job potentially or whenever that will happen.
I think he might. I think that's a good wrinkle. What if that job comes open after the season? Does he want to jump before this kicks in?
That would be smart.
Yeah.
But even still, like this is still kind of manageable. You could still probably sneak together like 8 wins, maybe pick off.
I don't know. I think if you assume everybody's like Auburn, if they're running at a better, like I think Freeze is going to recruit well there. So if they're running at a little bit better efficiency, I think they'll be tough. Georgia. South Carolina is another one that they're recruiting a lot better. So does that show on the field the next few years? I don't know, but it seems like it might. Florida's one that, I don't know what they're going to be really. Just I think they're recruiting well, but it doesn't show on the field, does that momentum slow down? And then Ole Miss with Kiffin and the portal, you never know. Tennessee and Texas are both ascending, it seems like. I think it's going to end up being tough. But like you said, it's not really much different than the schedule they've been. They just exchanged Missouri for Texas, so it's not too much different than what they've been going up against, really. But um, that Missouri Texas move, that's taking a win away probably. So
Yeah.
they might be able to stay in the same range, but I think some of the teams that they've been able to kind of, because they're so steady, it feels like some of the teams they've been able to kind of feast on while they're down might be getting their act together. LSU, I mean, they're kind of like, you kind of forget. To me, I don't always kind of forget about LSU, and they're like, oh yeah, they're really really good. Like they had a couple down years, but they're always really good, and their schedule's it's not exactly light.
I mean, it's a tough one. Bama at home, Oklahoma at home, and then you balance it out. Texas A&M, that's becoming like a very very heated rivalry between them, and they have to go to College Station. Florida's always like a wacky hate.
It's a weird game always.
Yeah, like LSU again, like kind of similar to Alabama. They're like very balanced on both sides in terms of both home and away. But like it's gonna be pretty tough for Brian Kelly.
Yeah, Arkansas. We talked about when we talked about Arkansas, but that I'm sure that crowd's going to be wild for that one. Arkansas on the road, Florida on the road, South Carolina, like we said, it could be ascending. Texas A&M, if this talent they're putting together is kind of coming is ascending there. They got Vanderbilt at home and Ole Miss, but that's another kind of rivalry game. So that's another tough one there. I think theirs might be sneaky difficult, but they're so talented. You feel like it's gonna go well, but that's a tough slate there.
Yeah.
Ole Miss seemed to be one that got. I mean, you keep the Egg Bowl. I feel like theirs changed quite a bit than normal. They seem to be kind of a team that got moved around a little bit more. I feel like both the Mississippi schools were kind of like, all right, where can we move them? Like we got some other games we like more. All right, let's finish it out with Ole Miss. Let's finish it out with Mississippi State. It's kind of what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
Does it feel that way to you?
Yeah, with like both. I mean, I guess we can talk about both with both Egg Bowl teams.
Yeah.
Like they get a mix of the new school. Like Ole Miss gets Oklahoma, Mississippi State gets Texas, and not only that, like they have a good mix of they have a good mix of like SEC East schools now on the schedule. Ole Miss gets Georgia, Mississippi State gets Florida, like Florida back on the schedule.
Mississippi State plays 4 East teams, or I think 4 traditional East teams, and only 2 traditional West teams. Is that right? Yeah, and then they add in Texas.
Yeah, Arkansas, A&M, and then of course,
and then Ole Miss. Yeah. But Tennessee, Georgia, Missouri, and Florida. So that's kind of a different. And I think Ole Miss is kind of in a similar boat. You get Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, and South Carolina. So more East than they've seen for both of these schools. So it feels like a throw-in, right?
Yeah, it's like So I mean, that's going to be, I guess, kind of like fun and interesting for their respective fan bases. Also, Ole Miss gets LSU. I guess that'll be kind of a pseudo protected rivalry. I know that's a big deal for like the older fans of both schools. Like, there's a lot of hate.
Yeah, Billy Cannon.
Yeah, Billy Cannon. Just yeah.
So real quick, almost forgot on LSU, and then we'll get the Power 5 teams they play, right? Kentucky, going back to them, Louisville. LSU's got USC and UCLA. We failed to mention that. I've added on to what they got now. That's a packed schedule there. Ole Miss is at Wake, and Mississippi State would be, I think it's at Arizona State. So some really kind of all over the place schedules for these 2 schools.
Yeah, LSU. I mean, the thing is, Caleb will be gone by then. So like you're going to be facing a USC team that's like breaking in a new quarterback. So they'll have that going for them. But yeah, kind of weird that they're playing both LA schools the year that both LA schools went to the Big Ten. Like,
yeah, and I guess they play USC in Vegas and then UCLA at home. So, I mean, you want to talk about a nice home slate. Like LSU's fans got to be pretty happy. UCLA, Alabama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. Vanderbilt, but that's a pretty good home slate there.
Yeah.
Egg Bowl teams. You got anything else to say on them? I mean, it seems like they're going to get a lot of new.
A lot of new. Like these are two teams that they'll be fighting. They'll be fighting to stay in that like 7-8 win category. I would imagine. Also for Mississippi State, kind of an underrated thing. Alabama's off the schedule. Mississippi State and Alabama are like the two closest schools in the SEC. They're only separated by like 80 miles. So that's going to be a bummer for, I guess, State fans. But,
and they've sneakily played a ton, right?
Yeah.
They're like they're one of those games where you don't even think about it, and then when everybody's kind of trying to put together their protected rivals, somebody's like Mississippi State and Alabama have played 85 times. You're like, what? So that I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. That's one that is kind of under the radar game that gets played all the time. So we got Mizzou up next. What did you have on them? Or I'll look at. I know. So out of conference, they're going to be playing Boston College. It looks like, and they get that. I think they get Oklahoma back on the schedule. Which there's been some big games with Oklahoma playing at Mizzou.
Yeah.
Chase Daniel, Jeremy Macklin, or maybe might have been Blaine Gabbert even at that point.
Yeah, Big 8, Big 12, like Big 8, Big 12 rivalry. Get Oklahoma. You get Oklahoma at home. You get Auburn at home. You get Alabama on the road. It's like the thing is, like I didn't really have much to say. Like I wrote down like Mizzou's schedule. Like yeah, you have tough opponents, but kind of unremarkable. Which it kind of describes like Missouri in the SEC. Like yeah, like. It's like, yeah, you're gonna have a tough schedule. You're not gonna really beat any of these like heavyweights. Like you're probably gonna lose to Oklahoma. You're definitely gonna lose to Alabama, Texas A&M. No, you're not gonna beat Texas A&M. They're at least recruiting. Yeah, they could have they could be in a tough spot, and then it's gonna be another situation where if like. Say Eli Drinkwitz like skates by and gets to 6 wins, then again, like what do you do? Like
yeah, I don't know. That's the new that's gonna be the interesting thing with where how do coaches get viewed with the playoff? Because that's something that's coming in the same year as well. So, maybe a 3-loss a year if you're the 12th, number 12th seed. That's considered a really good year, maybe. Whereas, before maybe that wasn't. With the 8 games, I think you still feel pretty good about bowl eligibility. Allegedly, that's a concern with going to 9 for some teams is taking away an out of conference win to get them to bowl eligibility. But who knows how that stuff will change. Missouri kind of also feels like kind of like the Ole Miss, Mississippi State, where they want to make sure they got the Egg Bowl, and then after that, it's kind of like all right, whatever. It seems like they want to make sure they got Oklahoma and maybe even Texas A&M. And after that, they have a little thing with South Carolina with like the Columbia thing, but it's not really a thing. It's as you're trying to make it a thing. But that's kind of Missouri's since Texas A&M felt like just a fit right away. Missouri's always been kind of, I would always I always suggest trade if we're just going to get out. If we're not going to really be Southeastern in the SEC, just see if you can trade Missouri for Nebraska. Missouri wants to be in the Big Ten anyways. Let's just then you can get Nebraska, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Texas, Nebraska, Arkansas. That'd be fun. You could have your Southwest Conference corner over there. It'd be pretty cool. And then in the Big 8 and the Big 12, all that stuff kind of coming together. It would be fun. But we talked about Oklahoma, South Carolina. We've mentioned them a few times. They're possibly ascending. They've been recruiting really well. They've been recruiting their state really well. I know they've gotten some big time offensive linemen out of there, beating out Clemson for some guys in state. So they're possibly ascending, but they got some tough ones. LSU at home, Texas A&M at home, and then on the road you got Alabama and Oklahoma. So
the one very interesting thing about South Carolina's schedule, they don't get Georgia, Florida, or Tennessee on the schedule. They're all gone.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to me. Like it's like you basically gave South Carolina like a West schedule almost.
That's true.
Well,
You
still
let
got
them keep the ones in the East they probably would have picked, right? If you said, all right, pick 3 in the East, you got to keep them. So
yeah.
and then they obviously they're going to be playing Clemson every year, and they'll be on the road at Clemson. So this year for South Carolina, going to be at Alabama, at Oklahoma, at Clemson. That's
It's
a tough road
it's
slate.
it's a tough road slate. So I'm looking at this because we're talking about South Carolina ascending. You're gonna lose at least two. Like okay, so you can probably chuck LSU as a loss. You could probably chalk up Alabama as a loss. If you could like pick off Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and then handle your business elsewhere, beat Clemson again, you're 10-2.
That might be playoff.
That's a playoff team.
Yeah.
That's like what would that be, like a 10-11 seed playoff team? Like you're in. So this sets up well for South Carolina. Like obviously you have to go out and beat the games, but that's where avoiding Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, that's where that's going to come in big for them.
Yeah, I think if you feel like you are ascending with your recruiting, then you should probably feel like Ole Miss, Missouri, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt wins. Like you said, LSU, Alabama, probably losses. You got to swing like the Texas A&M and Oklahoma. You win those two and then beat Clemson on the road. You're going to have a pretty good resume there. That's going to stack up well, I think, against most people. So you've got the opportunity to make something happen if you can kind of keep recruiting at that level. Another ascending program is Tennessee. A great year last year. We'll see if they can keep it going with the new quarterback. Obviously lost their offensive coordinator, Alex Golish, to USF. But I would imagine they'll keep chugging along there on offense, don't you think?
Yeah, but again, you protect Alabama. I think you're going to be at a point just where things are trending. You're going to be at a point where you're going to be past Florida.
It seems like it right now. It seems like they're in opposite directions right now, and it's a home game.
Kind of in a similar space with South Carolina, like Alabama. Like you beat Alabama last year, like that's gonna be a tough draw. Georgia, death machine, but again, you swing like some of these other tough games. You swing some of these other tough games. You go 10-2, you're in.
Yeah,
if you're Tennessee this year,
and they've got they're playing a neutral against North Carolina State. So I don't know what North Carolina State will be in a couple of years. They're always tough. So it's another good game out of conference. But yeah, I think you feel pretty good. If you just concede Georgia away game, you kind of concede that. You've got, Oklahoma is obviously a tough game on the road, but you've got, your next two toughest games probably at home. You feel pretty good about that. Kentucky, Mississippi State, you got to feel good having those at home. Vanderbilt on the road, you feel really good there. And then you got Arkansas. That could be a swing game depending on where they're at. There's so many – it's kind of 2 years out. Some of these teams are kind of – you don't know if they're plateauing right now or if they're going to ascend or I think this year will kind of tell a lot with like a team like Florida. If they can kind of steady the ship this year, well, maybe they can take a jump next year, the following year. But if they keep sliding, the slide might continue. So – but, there's teams, so that's South Carolina, Tennessee. If they can kind of keep that recruiting going up, those could be two that really benefit from like the 12-team playoff and peaking at the right time. I think Texas A&M is kind of in there too. We'll skip Texas. We already talked about them. Then they get the game at Jerry World with Arkansas, LSU, and Texas at home. So probably their two toughest games they both get at home. What do you think about Texas A&M? This will be kind of the year that great recruiting class will be kind of juniors, right? So
if
they can keep any of them there,
I put it down. If you're not able to get into an expanded playoff with the schedule, like you seriously should just go ahead and like eat the buyout money and get Jimbo out of there. This is a manageable schedule. You get LSU and Texas at home.
This sets up.
like it sets up, and then you go on the road to Auburn. We don't know what that's going to look like in year 2 of Freeze. A Florida team that has their own tough schedule, and we don't know like.
Yeah, I think placement of some of these will be crucial too.
Yeah.
If you catch Florida late, they might be beat up. Same thing like South Carolina could be they're both kind of. But it depends if you catch some of these guys late, where their schedule is a little more difficult.
Just like we always say with Texas A&M, it's like there's no excuse with the schedule. There's none for Jimbo at this. Heading into this year, this is what is like 6th year there, 6th year there, and so this is good. So this schedule in 2024 is going to be like its 7th year in College Station. Like, yo, you got to make the playoff, dude.
Then I think the buyout's at a good. There's some thought that if they don't do it this year, that it's over. But this schedule might make you want to run it back. It would seem manageable with the talent you've been bringing in. They'll sign another good class. They've got really good recruiters on staff, so this would be the year to peak right here. And maybe could you imagine if you're Texas A&M, you get Texas, you could have. I mean, there's a world where Texas and Texas A&M are playing on Thanksgiving for a playoff spot.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
If Texas seems to be right. If Texas peaks in 2 years with some of the talented classes they put together, Texas A&M, same thing. That last game of the season could be for a conference title spot, but probably could be for like a back end playoff spot too. So
because it'll be like a redshirt freshman Arch.
And all those linemen they've signed and all the skill guys that they've been putting together. And A&M will have that. I think the Wegman kid is really good. He got sick or something and couldn't play against Florida last year, and I think that helped Florida a lot in that game. And then their season kind of went into a death spiral after that game, Texas A&M's. But they've got a ton of talent. I think Wegman's going to be pretty good. So this 2 years from now, that could be a really marquee game there to end the season, which I'm sure is what kind of the SEC is banking on, putting that thing late, I would imagine. So that could be some excellent television. And then rounding out Vanderbilt, this is you get some fun teams coming to Nashville.
And to be fair to
one more thing on A&M. I think they play Notre Dame as their out of conference game.
That's right. They get
it looks like it's at home though. So you get Notre Dame at home, Texas at home. You get your probably 3 toughest games at home.
Yeah,
it's setting up for Jimbo.
Yeah, that's gonna be a hell of a home schedule at Kyle Field. Like they'll pull in. I mean, they already pull in like over 100,000 every single game.
Yeah, no, that's gonna be a tough ticket. Vanderbilt, this is an interesting one. It looks like Vanderbilt gets Virginia Tech at home.
Yeah, so again, like
what a great home schedule.
Yeah, that's a fan base that's again going to travel down and spend money in Nashville and like help you fund your facilities and stuff.
That's a tryout for Virginia Tech.
Yeah,
let's see how you guys travel.
But to be fair to Clark Lee, like they're slowly coming along. They seem like they're putting things together. Obviously, like even by 2024, they're still not going to be like in the upper echelon of the conference where it's like, oh, well, they could compete against LSU or Alabama. No, they can't. It's not going to happen even by next year. But they could still be a pain in the butt for someone. Like someone's going to there's going to be at least one team that goes up to Vanderbilt, and they're going to have a harder time than they expected. So,
I mean, just as Florida got last year, they screwed around, and Vanderbilt, they're well coached, man. And they hired Barton Simmons, who worked at 24/7 in recruiting, so as like a general manager. So that was kind of an interesting look. I think they actually signed. I'm trying to find it. They signed one of their best classes ever, I think, this past year. So they're like, it's not unbelievable compared to the rest of the conference, but it's better than it's been. At one point they were. Okay, so it looks like they ended up 52. That might be with transfers and everything combined, which that's going to be, I think that's kind of what's tough for them is the transfer side of things. There's probably not going to be a ton in there. There would be more out, I'd imagine. But they're going to be well coached. Clark Lee seems like he wants to be there. He's a lifer, right? He's from there, so
It's from like he went to school like right down the street, like high
and
school.
so Barton Simmons the same way. They went to same high school, I believe, in Nashville. So that's an interesting. They're interesting to watch. I thought they've got a couple. Their receiver, I think his name's Will Shepard, stud. They threw him the ball a ton last year. He's a great player. So they're gonna be one of those teams that if you screw around, I think they'll come up and bite you. So, but yeah, they have it tough like they always have it. So that's not gonna be much better. Earlier in the month, was it even? It might have been. Was it last week? Did the Big Ten release their schedule? It wasn't
last week or 2 weeks ago or something like that.
It wasn't long ago. The Big Ten released their schedule, and they did it a little different. So they had 9 games. They're sticking with the 9. And I really thought that this was really smart how they did it. They did they had the Flex Protect Plus, and then they also had something called 2-play opponents. So the Flex Protect Plus, right? So you have your protected opponents, so those protected rivals that you're going to play every year, and then they just assigned you a team you're going to play home and away for the 24 and 25 season. So, what did you think of this approach? This is SEC. Everyone's constantly talking about, well, it's got to be a 1. Is it going to be a 1-7 or is it going to be a 3-6? How are they going to do the schedule? And people were kind of asking the same, or is the Big Ten going to do a 3-6? What are they going to do? I thought this was a really smart way to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, because it's basically it's basically a 3-6, and you like you said, like the main thing. I mean, if there's any conference like along with the SEC that really cares about like protecting some of these traditional rivalries, it's the Big Ten. I mean, you obviously look at Michigan, right? Like you're going to get Ohio State, Michigan State every single year, like off rip. That's not negotiable. But then you throw them a bone, but then you bounce it out and throw them a bone. It's like, okay, here's Maryland, right?
Yeah.
Michigan, like Penn State, like I'm looking at Penn State, you get Michigan State rivalry. There's no, because I'm like really looking at this. I guess
Penn State, Penn State was the only team that didn't get anything protected, which I thought they may get Ohio State, but they didn't. My thought with this is I'd imagine that they'll kind of cycle through these, and if something kind of clicks, then they might, okay, we're going to protect this going forward. But Penn State, I guess, if you look back through history, and the Big Ten is pretty historic, they were independent for a long time, right? Penn State. I feel like a lot more of their rivals are like Big East teams.
Yeah, because Penn State didn't join the Big Ten until like 93.
Yeah, it was late.
Yeah, they didn't join late. But then obviously, like in the 3 decades since, I mean, they've developed like good rivalries. Like the Penn State-Ohio State game.
I thought that should have been – that's kind of my only gripe is I thought Penn State-Ohio State should have been locked. Ohio State's only got one, just the Michigan game. Yeah. I mean, maybe they just want to cycle the new teams through as much as possible. But I thought Ohio State, Penn State should have been locked. But other than that, I don't really have a ton of complaints. I think this was really smart.
Like, okay, so like look at the so then you look at like the Los Angeles schools. So obviously like USC and UCLA, they're locked in. USC on this rotation gets Penn State, Wisconsin, which those are 2 pretty tough games for the Trojans, especially like considering how consistent Penn State is. Like we complain about James Franklin and him like hitting his ceiling, but it seems like they're kind of trending up, and they're trending up into that space where they're gonna make the like expanded playoff.
They're a team that probably, if there was a 12-team playoff, they might have made it 3 or 4 times under Franklin. They've always been pretty good, but just under either Ohio State or Michigan. It seems like just couldn't quite take the jump to be the number 1. But they're a team that would make playoffs. I mean, one year, right? They won the Big Ten, and Ohio State they won the Big Ten, and then Ohio State made the playoff.
Yeah,
right? So
like
like they had a shout right there to make the playoff, but I think they're a team that's really going to benefit. I just kind of wish they had them in Ohio State play every year, but maybe that's kind of the thought. Like, hey, if we don't make Ohio State and Penn State play every year, maybe they can both make maybe we can get maybe we can get 3 playoff teams.
yeah,
So
potentially. Like
yeah.
USC playing Wisconsin is interesting because I really like Fickle at Wisconsin, and like it's gonna be interesting with Wisconsin over the next couple of years because it's like you have Fickle there. We know he's a hell of a coach, and then you have Phil Longo as their offensive coordinator. So you're living in a world where Wisconsin theoretically is going to be throwing the ball a lot. That's going to be I mean, like that, like I mentioned before, like how Kentucky USC is going to be weird. Like just Wisconsin in the LA Coliseum playing a conference game at USC, and it's them throwing the ball. Like that's going to be
yeah, it's like the bizarro world. It's going to be weird, right? When it's going to be weird seeing all these teams in LA. It's just going to feel like kind of like a Rose Bowl, right? Like every time you see one of these teams in LA, and then I'll pull up their actual schedule for the 24 schedule because these are kind of the protected rivals, and the teams are going to play both years. But we did get some games that are kind of outside of that, where they're not necessarily going to be playing in both years, but you're going to get 2 pretty good years. So here's the 24 schedule. Look at Michigan. So Michigan's has Ohio State on the road, USC on the road. They get UCLA at home that first year, and this is also the year they get Texas at home. So that's gonna be a pretty good year. Pretty tough year for Michigan there. USC first year in, Penn State on. I think they gave Penn State USC at home as kind of a make good for not giving them Ohio State as a protected rival. This is what it seems like to me.
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they view Penn State as one that they can kind of move in and out for TV matchups more than Ohio State or Michigan in terms of rivalries and things like that. But the newbies don't have. I think UCLA goes to Iowa year one. UCLA goes to Iowa. USC gets Iowa at home, and Michigan at home, and Wisconsin at home. This is going to be really wild to see some of these teams interact a little bit more.
I wrote down like the only team that doesn't get one of the LA schools is Michigan State. Like they're just playing like a straight up what you consider a normal Big Ten schedule that first year, which I mean, like avoiding USC, avoiding what's been a pretty good UCLA team with Chip Kelly the last couple of years. That could be.
They signed one of the top 3 quarterbacks in last year's class. I think Dante Moore. So they might be there to stay for a little bit too. So yeah, UCLA could be one that's kind of on the come up a little bit. But yeah, Michigan State. I mean, it's kind of traditional Big Ten, but you still get Michigan and Penn State on the road. You get Ohio State at home, but it's not exactly like the easiest schedule, but it is more traditional Big Ten.
And like look at some of these other ones. Anything that really jumps out. Iowa going to UCLA. Iowa, like again, that's going to be another.
Well, that's what those two. The Iowa versus both the LA schools is going to be is a fun dichotomy
there. Yeah, Iowa at USC, just trying to play like the most bland caveman, not mind-numbing football, frustrating Lincoln Riley. That's gonna be a fun time.
That'll be what'll be really interesting is it Mark Stoops caveman football like we mentioned earlier, or is it the same brand of caveman football as now? You can see, even though they didn't get it as a protected rival, you do get Ohio State at Penn State in 2024. I'd imagine that would be the whiteout game, but maybe they busted out on USC traveling in there. So there's a ton of really fun matchups here. anytime you kind of mix these two big brands in with a bunch of established brands, just like the SEC did, uh, it's going to be pretty cool for the viewer. Now, did the Big Ten, you think, do it better than the SEC? If the SEC, it seems like they should be going to 9. I would imagine you might get a revenue increase, hopefully, go to 9. Is this what they should do? You think they should copy the Big Ten's formula here?
Yeah, because I mean, the Big Ten's basically already there, and then there's, like you've been mentioning, like the protected rivalries. Like some teams have 2, some teams don't necessarily have them yet. So there's like flexibility. So there's flexibility. So you can kind of like change this around just depending on like how all of these matchups go for the next few years. But I think the most important thing is like you've established that all of these teams are basically gonna consistently play each other like in a reasonable amount of time, which the SEC, like, yeah, it's gonna, like, they're eventually gonna get to that point. It's just they're dragging their feet with it. Whereas it just seems like the Big Ten just has more, like, as they're like going out with their new media rights deal, like they kind of have like a better idea of like what exactly these pieces are going to look like on the television board over the next few years. So I think the Big Ten's already there, basically.
Yeah, I really like this format for them. I think this is something that the SEC should. I know they'll want to be the leader, but this I think fits what they want to do, because it's hard to get most of the teams in the SEC to 3. There's a few that'll get to 3 easy in terms of protected rivalries, games you want to play every year. But then there's a lot of ones like the Florida Tennessee, Georgia Tennessee. Is that like really worth saving? Or you could get Florida Auburn back on the schedule, or you get Georgia Texas or Georgia Oklahoma. I'd rather have that, right, than Georgia Tennessee. So I think this is a really, really smart way to do it. All right, so let's talk kind of with the 2. What are some of your favorite games from kind of the 2 conferences in 2024, SEC and Big Ten? We'll kind of end with what games. I think for me, like one of the ones off the top, Texas A&M, Texas, with what could maybe, if those teams both hit their peak, what that could mean, is obviously going to be really fun. What games stick out for you?
Just Georgia, Texas. Texas, like that's very interesting to me, because it's like everyone talks about like Alabama, like basically Alabama, Texas, the Steve Sarkisian like connection, the Steve Sarkisian connection there, like how Texas kind of wants to model itself in the form of Alabama, but like you're going to be immediately met with like the actual king of the conference right now. And it's going to be, basically it's going to be Arch Manning going up against what I'm sure it's going to be another Georgia defense that has about their entire starting defensive, everyone on defense basically going to the NFL, basically. Like, so good luck to Arch Manning with that. So I'm fascinated with that. Like you said, Texas A&M, that rivalry getting back on the books. Texas, Arkansas, like basically just anything Texas. Like Texas, the more I think about it, Texas joining the conference is very fascinating.
Oklahoma, LSU, and the SEC is another one. Oklahoma at LSU, I think, is another really fun one. Oklahoma, Alabama should be pretty fun. The Heupel thing with Oklahoma and Tennessee should be good. In the Big Ten, I think Michigan at USC should be pretty cool. Ohio State at UCLA is pretty cool. USC at Penn State is a big one. I think it's fun. Obviously, you have the game, but that's not really new, right? So those, and then the Iowas on both sides. It'll be interesting to see. How do you deal with the Iowas, USC and UCLA? How are you going to deal with the Iowas of the world? Nebraska at UCLA is kind of fun too. And then Wisconsin at USC is another. Like you said, we're going to see Wisconsin in the sun, throwing the ball around, pitching the ball around the yard, like per usual, right?
USC going to Maryland. Wait, no, yeah, that's a real game. USC going to Maryland, a huge body clock game. for them.
That's true.
That's just gonna be like that's gonna be really weird. That's gonna be really weird. Like USC playing a conference game in like suburban Washington D.C. Like,
well, yeah. In terms of weird, you see, like USC at Northwestern and Purdue is both going to look interesting, right? Just the way the fields look. I think both Northwestern and Purdue kind of have I don't know, they look different on TV than kind of other stadiums. I don't know if it's like the grass is dying or it's cold or, I think they show well on TV.
and that's another interesting thing with these schools is where, where and when are these games going to be played during the season? Like I'm staring right at UCLA and I'm staring right at UCLA going to Iowa. Is that going to be a game in September, or is that going to be a game in like mid to late November? Because the way this is set up, like these teams can't avoid it. You're gonna have to go to one of these places when it's cold. It's like 39 degrees. It's like 38 degrees outside during the day. It gets dark at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, it'll be great, and I think the USC Maryland game you mentioned will be interesting. That's definitely going to be like we're kicking that one up to prime time. You guys need a night game? Here you go. Here's two teams that'll play at night. They don't have that aversion, but yeah, it's just 2024 is going to be a really interesting year. It's the first year of the 12-team playoff. There's going to be a lot of weird things. I think that's really, when you look at the SEC, I think that's kind of what they want to see. I think how this first playoff is going to shake out, what's going to be important. And then maybe they go from there and set the schedule. I don't know how late they can set it, if they can wait to kind of see how it shakes out. But that seems to be, at least that's the public rationale, is what they're saying. They would kind of want to see, is it going to be strength of schedule of more important, or is it just going to be the fewest number of losses? Because it always seems to be, it's really more the fewest number of losses rather than strength of schedule is kind of how it feels like it ends up in the college football playoff a lot of times, but we'll see when we go to 12. Nick, thanks for jumping on here. We talked through about everybody in the SEC and got a good little Big Ten talk. Where can people find you in the meantime?
Yeah, just at Twitter account at Nick_J Simon. And then just check out everything that we do at DraftKings Nation. It's a NBA Finals just ended, so we're kind of in a very, very slow period, the dog days of summer. We'll have plenty of NBA draft coverage coming up next week. In the golf, plenty of U.S. Open coverage throughout the weekend. So, yeah, just go ahead and check us out.
Yeah, they do really good stuff at DK Nation. Nick does a great job. If you stayed and watched this whole thing, like, subscribe, leave a comment. We're trying to grow this new channel here on YouTube. Just what everyone needed, another college football podcast. But we have some interesting perspectives. We got national guys, Nick and Colin Sherwin, both kind of work at more of a national level. Myself, Nathan Bond, Robert Steig, Anthony Vito kind of work more local level, covering like one or two teams. So you kind of get different perspectives there. And we're going to try to do this during the season, weekly, maybe more. And hopefully we have something fun coming up next week. All the conference realignment and everything. We're gonna be 5 Power 5 conferences. We're gonna make our own conferences, and we're actually gonna draft. We're gonna make all 131 teams now. What is it? 131? 131? All eligible, and we're gonna draft. We're gonna draft our conferences. So should be a lot of fun. Hopefully that comes out next week. Thanks for joining us, talking about the SEC here and their schedule release. Like I said, like, subscribe, leave a comment, help us game the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for watching.